I drove away from that animal crematorium in a blaze of rubber. No other cars were outside, so I have no idea how Keaton had gotten there. Did he walk? I never heard a car idling or an engine starting up. The sun had set, and that made me feel a deep seething sense of unease, like the miles of surrounding red rock and highway were out to get me, out to hurt me. Dr. Harkham's head still rolled around beneath my jacket, but the ventriloquism act had stopped. I should have tossed him out into the desert, but that didn't feel right. A man who I'd worked with and grown to care about. He had a temper, but so did I. That's why we meshed. God, his poor wife, his poor fucking kids. I felt like Joe might know what to do with the severed head sitting in my passenger footwell. Joe had tried to call back, but I didn't pick up. I had a sneaking suspicion that Keaton was listening through Dr. Harkham's ears. I drove along a cut of dusty road for almost an hour before I saw a rest stop. I saw the needle crawling towards empty on my gas gauge. I didn't want to stop, but I had no choice if I wanted to make it to the res. I pulled off the highway and saw an old pump stop that was desolate. A single produce semi-truck sat in the parking lot near the diesel pumps. The overhang lights looked like an oasis in a sea of dull black pitch. I settled into a pump and tossed a few more items of clothing down on top of where Dr. Harkham's head stayed. I heard a low chuffing sound beneath the layers of fabric. I ignored it. I needed to focus, to observe my surroundings. I stuffed Mutt's ashes into my purse alongside my pistol. I passed by a grizzled, overweight trucker sitting in his driver's seat, watching me cross the sidewalk. I wandered into the gas station and grabbed an assortment of jerkies, energy drink cans, and a steaming cup of coffee. Not road trip snacks, just things to keep me alive, thinking through the night, to keep me surviving until dawn. A scrawny early 20s burnout sat with his feet resting up on the countertop. I could hear the sound of a movie playing through his phone speakers. He casually ate away at a bag of popcorn. The coffee tasted burnt, metallic. The lights flickered overhead like they weren't sure they wanted to be on. 40 on pump 6, I said, sliding my assortment of items across the counter. He didn't say a word, just clicked away at the register with a hand absent-mindedly. I slipped him a handful of 20s, and he tore his eyes from the phone long enough to pour change into my hand. I left without a word. I crossed below the blanket of light cast by the overhang shining down on pumps. I stopped walking when I turned over and saw that the semi-truck was empty. A wrongness crashed down around me, an all-encompassing feeling of doom. I surrendered to the feeling. I didn't walk towards the truck, didn't go to investigate. I had an idea that's what Keaton wanted me to do, what he was waiting for me to do. I kept my eye on the semi's cab, inching backwards with a bag in one hand, a coffee in the other, purse slung over one shoulder. My breath sounded pitched in the darkness, labored and heavy. I saw a glimmer of red across the inside of the semi's windshield, a glistening brushstroke. I didn't peel my eyes from the semi as I filled up my tank. As soon as I was done, I slid into my truck and started it up. The click of the locks engaging brought little to dissuade the rising tide of panic drowning me from the inside out. As I pulled around the pumps and across from the station, I saw the right side of the semi in the flash of my headlights. The cab driver's side door was cracked open, blood flung in congealed globs on black asphalt. I saw him then, Keaton. He was perched between the semi's wheels like a spider hiding beneath a rock. His limbs like long wooden posts stretched with a thin layer of white skin. Pinched feet held onto the underside of the truck bed in a broken contortion. His elbows buckled in the wrong directions. Everything was so much longer than they should have been. Neck like a tangled, twisting vine. His eyes refracted the light like two glowing yellow orbs. The bite wound on my leg began to itch, then burn. I saw thin fingers of smoke pouring out of my purse, and I pulled out the warm ashes of Mutt. and set them on the passenger seat. I heard a faint crackle like embers in those ashes. The car began to smell like singed hair and cooking flesh. I noticed a sharp smile on Keaton's face, his mouth drenched in rivulets of blood. The trucker sitting in his cab earlier lay in a twisted heap beneath Keaton. The trucker's rib cage was cracked open like a crab shell. One of Keaton's sharp hands was digging around inside the man like a woman digging around inside her purse for her keys. Keaton's stare lingered, piercing as I swung my car around, kicking up a shiver of dust, and I flipped my truck into a higher gear. Keaton pulled a dripping red hand out of the trucker's sucking chest cavity and began waving at me. A friendly hello. I revved up the engine, blowing down that road back onto the highway faster than I should have. It wasn't until a few minutes later that I remembered the cashier, sitting alone at his post, unaware of the broken thing feasting just outside his doors. God, I hope it didn't come after him next. I thought about calling the police, I really did. But God, I had a severed head in my car. I couldn't get involved with the police. They'd have asked for info I simply couldn't provide. The head of Dr. Harkham was letting out a low drone in the footwell as I tore forward down the highway. I sipped the coffee as the mile markers slipped past, the hum of the highway loud in the quiet. The head in the footwell let out a faint groan under the jacket. I hit Joe's name on my screen and waited. He picked up on the second ring. "Allison," he said. "You still breathing?" "Barely," I said. "I can't talk long, and I can't say much. Not out loud." A beat of silence. "It's with you?" "Not him. But it's listening. I brought something I probably shouldn't have. I think it hears through it." "All right," Joe said, calm but clipped. "Just talk around it. I can follow. I'm heading your way. Should hit the basin in a couple hours. Give or take. We're setting up now," he said. "Called in a medicine man named Desba. He knows that old stuff. Said what you told me last time was a bad shadow. Said that thing you shot might have been a mask. Not a real dog." "It wasn't a dog," I said, my voice wavering just a hint. Joe exhaled through his nose. I could picture him standing outside his truck, wind tugging at his sleeves, oiled gator skin boots kicking at the weeds. We set the line near the arroyos. You'll see it before the road curves west. Cedar, ash, pollen. Desbaw's been blessing it himself. That thing steps through. It'll feel it. Might even stop it. I'll drive through. I'll lead it in. He paused. "You sure it's still behind you?" "No," I said. "I'm not sure of anything. Except it's not done with me." His voice dropped. "Allison, if that doesn't work, we've got a backup plan. If it follows past the ridge, lead it to the trailer up on the hill. It's mine. Go in, make sure it follows, then slip out the bathroom window and shut it behind you. Locks from the outside. You won't see anyone, but we'll be in position. My cousins are posted nearby. Desba will be with us." "Good." Another silence passed between us, the kind that holds everything neither of us wanted to say. "I don't know what this thing is, Joe," I said finally, "but it's not a man. Not anymore." "I figured that much. I hate that I'm leading you into this, Joe." He chuckled. "I'd do anything for you, Ollie. Just hate it took something this awful for us to reconnect." I winced. I should have reached out sooner. But time has a way of slipping through your fingers. "You sure your people are ready for this?" "No one's ready for something like that. But we've dealt with worse than dogs wearing skin." "Joe," I felt a tear streak down my cheek. For the first time, it wasn't an unkindly shed tear. "I know. Just get here. We'll take care of it." I stared at the horizon, where the last light had slipped away hours ago. The jacket in the footwell twitched, and a low, Warbling breath rattled through the fabric. Listening, clicking teeth together. Soon, I said, just keep the fire burning. I hung up. The road stretched on for miles. I fought the pull of sleep, guzzling caffeine and chewing jerky to stay alert. I was flying toward a violent conclusion. Keaton felt drawn to me, like I was his muse, and he the artist. Maybe it was because I killed Mutt. Maybe something deeper. Some unseen thread tying us together. He killed my friends and coworkers. He beheaded the vet I worked for, burned down the clinic, even murdered a trucker just to send me a message. This was more than cruelty. This was personal. A few miles out from the res, I saw a wash of blue and red lights behind me, followed by the chirp of a police siren. If my sanity were a spool of thread, it was unraveling fast. This night felt like a nightmare unfolding slowly, like a dress billowing on a clothesline. I pulled calmly to the side of the highway, though my heart thundered in my chest. I kept my hands on the steering wheel and stared into the rearview mirror. The officer approached from the right, walking the shoulder with caution. He came to the passenger window and motioned for me to roll it down. I did. "License and registration, please," he said in an authoritative tone. "Yes, 1 second, officer." My eyes dropped to the bundle of clothes on the floor, and I forced myself to look back up at the glove box. I pulled out some crumpled insurance paperwork and my registration, then grabbed my license from my purse and handed them all over. His face stayed blank, maybe a little annoyed. He had just started walking back to his cruiser when Dr. Harkham's head began to moan. A low, drawn-out sound that grew into a wail. My heart stopped. The mood shifted instantly. The officer turned, clicked on his flashlight, and swept the beam across the truck's interior. "What is that noise?" he asked, flashing the light across the dash, the seats, the floor. The beam settled on the lump in the passenger footwell. He reached down with a gloved hand. "No, don't, please," I said, my voice cracking, panic blooming fast. If he found the head, Keaton would be the least of my problems. "Be quiet, ma'am," he snapped. With 2 fingers, he peeled back the jackets, the dirty shirts, and the jeans. He gasped when he saw the head, eyeless, crusted in dried blood, the flesh writhing slightly, twitching on the floorboard. The head wailed louder now, 2 black, empty sockets staring up at him. "Oh, Lord have mercy. What the hell is this?" His tone shifted again, this time to fury. "Ma'am, step out of the vehicle. Now." I reached for my door handle and heard him unholster his sidearm with a sharp pop. His flashlight lit up the cabin like a searchlight, held steady in his left hand. In his right, he raised a sleek black pistol, his gloved fingers wrapped tight around the grip. "Do you have any weapons in the car?" "I have my revolver in the purse. Nothing else." "Officer, please listen to me." "Shut it," he snapped. "Hands laced behind your head. Kneel down in front of the car." No other cars passed by. Besides the wind, it was too quiet. The air shifted. Bad air. A bad omen. It smelled like dust, but beneath it was something fouler. The reek of decay swam through the midnight breeze. The scrublands stretched for miles behind barbed wire fences. The officer reached for his radio but paused, listening. A low howl rose from the distance. A coyote drowning in a river. A wolf caught in a trap. It was a sound full of pain, too close, and the air around us vibrated with something uncanny. I had moved in front of the truck, obeying his commands. My feet moved without thought. I had always been pliable under authority, never one to break rules. The bushes rustled behind the officer, off to the right beyond the shoulder. He swung his light over. It landed on a figure, long limbs, a hunched body, a neck twisted like it had broken in multiple places. He looked like a crane fly, all angular joints and stilted motion. His eyes shone like white flares in the dark. The officer's mouth fell open. He stammered, trying to speak, but only half-formed words spilled out. His hand finished drawing the sidearm, and he turned toward Keaton. Keaton remained still beneath the moonlight, crouched in the sagebrush, motionless, while my body started to shake. Then he charged. He burst forward on Long, pounding limbs, elbows jutting out as they absorbed the weight of his insectile body. His mouth opened wide, stretching into his neck like a twisted ribbon of pale flesh lined with thorns. He didn't run. He skittered on all fours. The officer stood in a trance. He couldn't raise his revolver. His hands trembled, belt rattling with the weight of his fear. His face had gone pale, sickly, like he'd come down with the flu. Sweat beaded on his forehead beneath the brim of his hat. His radio crackled weakly against his chest. Time froze, held in place. I wanted to speak, to move, to do anything. But my words stuck in my throat, choking me. I was frozen too, paralyzed by the sight of something that monstrous. Somewhere behind me, Dr. Harkham's head began laughing. Keaton was a rolling twister of violence, like staring into an oncoming hurricane, feet glued to the ground. Violence incarnate. He vaulted the railing in a single leap and crashed into the officer with terrifying force. He slammed the man's back against my passenger door so hard the entire truck shifted to the left. That broke my paralysis. I scrambled back into the truck and turned the key. My passenger window was still rolled down, and through it I saw the officer's limp body smashed against the door. His weight bent the metal with a few sharp, hollow pops. Keaton's jaw opened wide, stretching all the way to his throat, a mess of twisting yellow teeth. He was chewing through the officer's skull, tearing flesh, stripping it clean. The flashlight and pistol clattered to the pavement. Then Keaton's eyes came into view, slitted, swollen, like two overripe grapes. A predator's eyes, empty, starving. I slammed the gas. The car lurched forward. Something on the officer's duty belt scraped against my paint. I felt a thud as both bodies tumbled off my truck and hit the pavement behind me. In the rear view, I saw Keaton's naked body wrapped around the officer, limbs grasping and tearing. His skin crawled with motion, like the organs inside him were alive and shifting. The flashing lights from the squad car bathed them both in red and blue. One of the cops' boots rolled into the road, its laces dragging behind like it was trying to crawl away without him. Keaton paused, then began pulling the corpse behind him, dragging it like a child pulling along a favorite blanket. When I was a few yards away, Keaton snapped his head sideways at a breakneck speed. His gaze locked directly onto the back of my truck. It was piercing, inevitable, furious, like he'd just realized I was getting away, and the rage hit him all at once. As he grew smaller in the rear view, I saw him heave the officer's body off the ground and toss it deep into the scrublands. Then he started running after me. I climbed faster and faster, 60 miles per hour. The old truck's engine began to rumble beneath me. 70. The engine groaned. I caught the sharp smell of gas fumes. Keaton was gaining. At 80, the truck shook, barely holding together as the engine roared. I burned rubber twisting onto an off-ramp, saw an oncoming car a few miles down the road. My tires nearly lost traction on the gravel, kicking up a flurry of pebbles as I fought for control. Keaton was close enough to reach out. He moved impossibly fast, loping with his long limbs and elbows tucked tight to his sides. I saw the fire burning in his eyes. He was done chasing. He wanted blood, mine, and if he caught me, I knew he wouldn't let me go again. The ashes of Mutt crackled in the passenger seat like gunpowder. The head lolled from side to side in the footwell. I felt like I was losing my mind. But between the smell of scorched ash, the reek of decay blooming around me as Keaton drew closer, and the sound of the head laughing, I knew I wasn't crazy. This was all real, raw, and wrong. The box I had been stuffing all these impossibilities into was overflowing now. What happens when the box breaks? Would my mind break too? I passed through the arroyos and toward the toll booth borders of this part of the res. The barrier bars were lifted. Was this where the line had been drawn? Could Keaton cross it? He was halfway up the roadside, nearly level with the side of my truck. He wasn't looking ahead. His neck was twisted toward me, his body pounding forward with a mindless kind of purpose. His mouth hung open, eyes wide. Behind me, Dr. Harkham's head shouted with laughter. The engine rattled with speed. Keaton was so close I could smell death. I could see the dried blood of so many victims caked across his twisted, nude body like a suit of crimson armor. Right as I crossed the border barricade, Keaton veered sharply to the left. I watched him clear the fence and crash down in a heap, thrashing on his back like an insect, arms curled toward the sky. The head stopped laughing. The ashes stopped crackling. I slammed the brake pedal to the floor. Keaton writhed. I saw Joe's trailer on the hill, half swallowed in dust, lit by the hard glare of floodlights. I focused the headlights on him. His thrashing slowed, then stilled. My tires thumped over uneven ground as I crept forward, heart burning like a live wire. I stomped the gas, aiming to crush him beneath the weight of the truck. But he leapt at the last second, sprawling across the roof and smashing through the back windshield in a burst of glass. I flung the car into reverse. One tire crunched over his leg. For the first time, I saw pain in Keaton's eyes in the rear view. I clenched my teeth until my jaw ached. Keaton clung to the frame, screeching. He yanked and pulled, his foot pinned like a plank beneath the tire. I slammed into drive. He flew backwards off of the car, his limb bending and snapping like a brittle branch. As I climbed toward the hill, I saw him rise again on all fours. One leg was twisted into broken segments, the foot dragging unnaturally across the dirt. And still, he came after me. But now, there was a break in his stride. He was slower. He was wounded. And if it bleeds, it can die. At least, I hoped so. I rounded the rise. The area was desolate. Not a soul in sight. I hoped that was part of the plan. I prayed it was. I slid my car into park on the ridge and pulled the parking brake. Behind me, I heard the pounding of hands on earth, getting closer with every second. Keaton landed on my roof with a thud, the metal buckling under his weight. Then he threw himself forward, vaulted over the hood, and smeared blood across the windshield as he rolled and hit the ground. He stood facing me with those reptile eyes, blocking the way to the trailer. Its door was wide open. I pulled the gun from my purse and pointed it at him. He tilted his head, and I felt my muscles tense. I wasn't pulling the trigger. Something inside me was pulling against it. I fired once. The bullet missed him entirely and buried itself into the trailer wall. Keaton charged. I dropped the pistol and ran around the car. He roared as his broken ankles slammed against the dirt. He scrambled onto the roof again, and I ducked to avoid a swipe from his hand. The spot where Mutt had bitten my ankle throbbed, and the pain lit sparks behind my eyes as I flexed and pushed through. The body will break itself to escape death, and the mind, drowning in adrenaline, becomes a weapon. But he was feeling it too. The adrenaline. His nervous system was short-circuiting. his mouth open like a wilted flower, tongue flicking through the air. He was tasting something. Could he smell Joe, the others? Were they near? He leaped, and I dove through the trailer doorway. One of his claws raked across my back. I shoved past a floral couch, knocked pans off a shelf in the narrow kitchen, and bolted toward the bathroom. Keaton thundered in behind me, screaming, "Fuck you, I'll rip out your throat." His voice scraped like rusted wire dragged across concrete, echoing down the narrow hallway. "Play with your insides. Eat them." The trailer rocked under Keaton's weight, metal hinges groaning. I slammed the bathroom door behind me and scrambled for the open window. My foot knocked over a toothbrush and a tube of paste as I shoved myself through. Pain flared along my back. The wound on my calf throbbed. Keaton was almost on me. I could feel his heat, the hate radiating off him. The door splintered just as I dove. My teeth cracked against desert stone when I hit the ground. A burst of white light exploded behind my eyes, and blood filled my nose, hot and thick. Something moved past me, fast. Silent, I heard the window slam shut. Arms wrapped around my torso and dragged me away from the trailer, around to the front by my car. Keaton's voice roared from inside, a storm of curses and blasphemy. He screamed like a trapped coyote, cornered and caged. He'd sensed something was off, but he couldn't help himself. His bloodlust had outpaced his instincts. Now he was trapped. I turned my face upward. The sky above the basin cracked with heat lightning. Purple veins crawled across the clouds. The air buzzed with insect calls and owl cries. The desert had awakened, and it seemed to know what was coming. A man I didn't recognize moved past me, wearing a bandolier of bundled sage and carrying a rawhide pouch that smelled of cedar and cornmeal. He approached the trailer with quiet purpose, opened my truck door, and retrieved the bundle of Mutt's ashes and the shrouded head of Dr. Harkham. With steady precision, he placed them both through a window into the trailer. Another man knelt in the dirt near the rear axle. An elder in a long shirt embroidered with turquoise beads and white ochre. He began to sing in a language I didn't understand. The words were low and heavy, his voice rolling like wind through canyon crests. He poured corn pollen in a slow arc around the trailer, his movements deliberate and unwavering. The others joined in. Their chant rose from the earth like the black smoke from the trailer. The song was older than Keaton, older than the desert. Then came the drumbeat, deep and rhythmic. A taut deer hide stretched over a cedar frame, struck in time with the chanting. Inside the trailer, Keaton's limbs thrashed. A hand burst through the kitchen window, blistered and cracking. His skin was changing, splitting, leaking. Joe stood nearby, rifle leveled, his breath slow and focused. The bullets he fired were ceremonial, silver cast and marked with ash and pollen, each one struck with meaning. Keaton screamed like something dying. His voice scraped against the trailer's walls as flames began to rise from underneath. The tinder place below had caught. Smoke coiled into the night sky, carrying something foul and wrong. The fire grew, hungry and bright, fed not only by gasoline but by intention, by design. Keaton howled as the medicine circle tightened around him. His bleeding eyes gleamed through the flicker of flame, filled with disbelief and fury. He clawed at the walls, tried to find the door, but it had been sealed from the outside with rawhide bindings and sacred paint. He scratched at the windows, too narrow for his spider-like frame to slip through. The chanting never stopped, even when the trailer began to cave inward, even when the screams turned wet and animal. The fire consumed. The wind shifted. I watched Keaton stop fighting. I saw his flesh pock, blister, rupture, and burn. He looked at me through the window, the same way Mutt had, with those vacant, unreadable eyes. Joe watched his home burn to embers. For me, there wasn't a trace of regret in his expression, only that same ruthless, focused anger. I spit blood through my cracked lips, and then the world went quiet. No birds, no insects, not even coyotes. No Keaton, not anymore. Only the breath of the desert and the low hum of thunder threading the sky. We stood and watched the trailer's shell glow red, then crumble. Joe's cousins moved through the sagebrush with extinguishers, tamping out sparks before they could catch. I didn't look away until it was dark, silent, hollow. Then I broke. Not cleanly, not quietly. My whole body shook with sobs dragged from someplace beneath grief. I screamed, raw and hoarse, and clung to Joe like a raft in a black ocean. He wrapped me in a musty blanket and said nothing, just held on. One hand pressed firm to my back. I wept into the chest of his shirt. So much gone, so much taken. It better be dead, I said between sobs. We're going to bury the ashes of that fuck cur. Disbar's gonna make sure it doesn't come back. I used to believe in quiet deaths, gentle ones. That was before Mutt, before the laughing sickness that was Keaton. The world had gone still. No more chase, no more fire, no more road to burn through. Just the sound of my breath hitching, the dull ache in my limbs, and the weight of deep grief settling into my bones.
Please subscribe to the channel, like and share to receive more stories. Thank you and have a good night.